Good morning to most, good afternoon to others, and good evening to the viewing audience across the pond. My name is Jason Miles, and welcome to another episode of This is Revolution Podcast. I am hoping that this is the last episode that I do from the terrace due to this particular situation of not having any Wi-Fi. Allegedly, it's supposed to get fixed today. We'll see. We do have some of my favorite Haitian members of the TIR crew, or should I say the only Haitian members of the TIR crew, with us today for this very insightful discussion. Please welcome my homie, my co-host, my dog. He is the man of the Mau Mau Hour. He is the Pascal Robert.
Peace and greens to the chat. Peace and greens to the audience. Peace and greens, Jason Miles.
It's so different without the applause, right?
I see you with the Pyro Crips now.
Nah, red is a very different color if you're from where I'm from. It means you're from the north.
That's right. This is
the Bay Area.
Pyro Crips are the blood.
That's some LA shit. I'm not from LA. They can have that. That's LA shit. We don't do that where I'm from. Now, speaking of the real gangster from New York, she is the faceless voice of reason on TIR. Please welcome M. Toussaint. Yeah.
Hello. Clap.
Yay!
You just killed the audio listeners.
Did I? I can't get a feedback on this that doesn't allow you to get like a mic check. So I do have something. I haven't told either one of you guys this. This actually really happened to me, and I do have to blame Haitians for this. Oh, thank you. So as you know, Toussaint, Pascal, you may not know this. I have decided to dip my toe into the online dating pool, and I signed up for some dating apps. But I really, you can make a circumference of where you want to look. So I tried to make it really small so I could look within the country that I live. And of course, there's going to be language barriers because my Spanish is not very good. So I had connected with a woman, and we were just having a very casual conversation. And this is two things. Number one, that debate really fucked a lot of shit up for Haitian people. And number two, Google Translate is not your friend on a date. So her and she's like asking me like what I did or whatever. And I was like, oh, I went to a restaurant with my amigo Ben. And she was trying to ask like, where did we eat? But she ended up asking like, where did we go? And so the restaurant we went to, I said it in Spanish, El Gordo, El Gato. It's the fat cat. It's called the Fat Cat. That lady sent me the longest response of why it's not cool to eat cats, and we don't eat cats in Mexico. Because there's a Haitian population here. And a lot of times when they see black people, they just assume you're Haitian. So she
Unreal.
I'm reading it and I'm like, fuck is she going on about? I'm like, oh. So I had to send her like literally the website of the restaurant.
Thank you.
She literally thought that
JD Vance and Trump for forwarding racist tropes about Haitians to just affect Jason's dating life.
These unintended consequences. Look at that.
I'm always bragging about my Haitian co-host. And by the way, your Haitian cousins that live out here, not very nice.
We all can't be as pleasant.
I told you. Hey, I just say what's up to them and they just turn their heads at me. I'm like, oh, I didn't know it was like that down here.
Everyone thinks they're eating cats. That's why.
I was so, but I'm. What? I'm trying to be serious.
It's not funny, man. It's not funny, man.
I wish I could show you guys the message because it's like even the way you read it, there was so much like indignation. Like just she goes, we do not do that here in Mexico. We do not eat cats. That is not right. Cats are pets. And I was like, I was like, what the fuck? I was like, oh no. This restaurant's called the Fat Cat. It's not.
Cats are not
You
a
don't
part
eat.
of Haitian cuisine either. Haiti is not even one of the top 10 cat eating countries in the world.
I'm mad you found out that there was 10. Was that part of your debunking research?
No, it's
after
something
you watched the debate.
came up in my time.
One of your Haitian brothers and sisters was like, we are not even part of the top 10.
That's like we're all in a club together. We sit in meetings together out of minutes. All the Haitian brothers and sisters. What is this like
about the lies, about the
the
imperialist
Black Power
lies.
era? The brothers and sisters are coming together to fight all the slander.
Well, my
right.
Haitian experience is real, and they don't say hi.
Marianne
Yeah,
Williams
Marianne
thinks
Williams.
that it's part of voodoo.
What do you say to that, Pascal?
Ryan Williamson doesn't know Jack from Juju in voodoo.
And
So Marianne
this
Williams is
also
not going to be a guest on the show.
no.
MT is a V.
That's right. Well, I am a vegetarian, so I'm fine. I
She
look
can
at
have
all
cat
of you
cheese.
meat eaters the same.
What did you think? Like seriously, you two. What did you two think when you heard the Haitians are eating cats thing?
I heard it before the debate, so I was like, they can't be actually saying this. And I was like, yeah, I mean, listen, if Trump can come out and say your country's a shithole country, why can't he see you eat cats?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this
He
is the
didn't
normal.
specifically say Haitians, and it's amazing to me that connection was made.
That's how racist the people are.
Mm-hmm.
That's the Haitian. Haitian has become the N word. That's the safest N word you can say right now.
Yeah.
God
I mean,
damn.
yeah, man, there's a long history of anti-Haitianismo coming out through the West in terms of how they view Haitian people. It's tied to Haitians, being considered too rebellious and punishing them for daring to be free and fighting off the oppressions of the shackles of slavery. So there's this, there's never too great of a price to pay to humiliate Haitians for, challenging the three greatest slave owning empires in the 19th and 20th century and 18th and 19th century, I mean. So
Mm-hmm.
it goes without saying, man. It's nothing new, and I doubt it'll be over anytime soon.
Well, just for the record, I've been around MT and Pascal in real life, and I've been around them with pets. They're not fans. They're not fans.
No.
And I did want to kill Daniel Tutt's cat.
Oh.
That cat was dangerous.
That cat was dangerous. Just also to let the patrons know, last month we launched the Crisis Papers, a bi-weekly series of essays, mainly by me. And they are free to all patrons. And the magazine formatted version is also free for most tiers of Patreon. But if you are not a patron and don't want to be a patron, but still want to have access and read these Crisis Papers, that's fine. There's a link in the chat and you can get your copy now. You want to read that super chat, Tucson?
Sure. Dizzle McFizzle says, it's a Nazi talking point. It's part of the long project of dehumanizing language from the right.
Oof. Well, speaking of dehumanizing language, let's talk about the pseudo progressiveness of white privilege discourse. When we talk about white privilege, does renouncing your privilege, does it close the racial wealth gap or liberate people of color from systemic oppression? Will it dismantle mass incarceration or challenge the roots of racialized poverty? Or does this discourse obscure the deeper class antagonisms that undergird capitalism itself? Today, we'll explore what's often missed in these discussions, how the focus on white privilege detracts from a collective fight against the structures of capital, reinforcing economic inequalities and diverting attention from solidarity building across racial lines. In her essay, Inventing White Privilege, Pseudo-Progressivism in American Political Discourse, Hadass Silver critiques how white privilege rhetoric serves to reproduce rather than challenge class exploitation. This discussion will critically examine the 5 main facets of white privilege discourse: greater access to material resources, the enjoyment of rights without discrimination, the dominant culture as a normative standard, racial superiority, and not being discriminated against. Silver highlights that while these elements of privilege may describe real disparities, they fail to address the root cause of social stratification, capitalism itself. As Silver argues, privilege rhetoric perpetuates a hyperfocus on identity and obscures the material conditions that shape inequality, class exploitation, and the functioning of capital. By focusing on perceived privilege, we obscure the real mechanisms of exploitation that affect all working class, Black, brown, and white. This framing, as Silver emphasizes, is anti-solidaristic, driving a wedge between potential allies in the struggle for a more egalitarian society. Please welcome our guests. We have 2 guests. We have good Cedrick is back.
What's up, y'all?
And for the first time, we have Hadass Silver.
Hello. Thank
Welcome,
you.
welcome.
Thank you for explaining my work more clearly than I can. That's very helpful.
I thought it was very clear and concise and was not filled with a lot of academic wording. So I'll shut up on that regard. What was the impetus for you to go down this rabbit hole discussing the lie of white privilege? Did a Black person yell at you?
No. I was thinking about this. It's funny you ask, because this is what I was thinking about before we were all going to talk together. But it's my own milieu that I come from. I went to Oberlin College for undergrad, which
say no more.
Yes. Okay, good. Yeah, it's a hot spot for focusing on things like moralizing about and everything. But in white privilege, particular, it was I was there from 2008 to 2012, and it was like the burgeoning of a lot of this becoming public. And I think the impetus was that the way that people talked about equality and the focuses, some of it was fine, but a lot of it just felt gross, is the best way I can put it. And I think the impetus was in part trying to figure out why this feels gross to me. It was that part of it, and why this doesn't fit with my sense of what equality and solidarity should look like, and trying to not have kind of a visceral reaction to it, but figure out what I was thinking. So the academic work that can, keep us going sometime is just figuring out our own discomfort. And it felt good that it pursuing that aligned with my politics, and feeling like I was sorting out something that, like when you do this, you hope that is also, like the littlest part of a tool that can help give some type of language to things that other people with their own sensibility about equality are feeling gross about too.
I wanted to ask you, can you
Pascal, do you want to add something?
Yeah. Sure. Can you go into the history and the origins of how this white privilege discourse developed and how it comes out of the New Left particularly?
Yeah, sure. So white privilege discourse in kind of factions of SDS and trying to figure out in the late 60s and 70s, you have activists largely, also largely middle-class groups of activists trying to figure out why Marxism hasn't happened, why there hasn't been a socialist revolution. And one of the theories by Noel Ignatius and Ted Allen that starts emerging is that it's really the white working class that is the main issue. So, we've been focusing on capitalists and the bosses and different things like that. But like, if we really want to attack, capitalism first, and the first thing we have to do, the first line is getting our white comrades to get rid of their sense of privilege, because their racism is in the way of us pursuing class solidarity. So early on, you have the focus still on class solidarity, but it's the introduction of, first, there needs to be a consciousness purification within organizing groups, and starting to think of the white working class as the first line of attack of who you need to change. And it, to me, gets the order of operations backwards in a lot of ways. But it's coming out of something I'm sympathetic to initially, which is trying to figure out why there isn't more class power in the United States in particular.
And it's all your angry Archie Bunker like dad's fault that works at a factory.
Yeah, it's that. And then I think that early on, it's also your implicit stuff. Like it's not just, I think early on in the conception of why the white working class, or why your like white fellow organizers are messing up, is it's not, I think, I wish I had more specific examples, but the microaggression element of this is inherent in this too. It's like, okay, it's not just the explicit Archie Bunker type racism. It's not just the grotesque thing. Like, at this point, we know that that's fucked up. But what it is also this slights, these asides, these senses of privilege, of advantage, and people not wanting to let that go. So the shift is not just you're being racist. The shift is that you're fundamentally, one, you have some inherent, implicit biases, blah, blah, blah. But also you're fundamentally too attached to the advantages you get from your whiteness to be able to appreciate what Black people need out of this movement, and to be able to be good allies for them. So it's trying to kind of, this is where like this religious, more psychology element comes in, of like, we're working on psyches here rather than organizing first and foremost.
Now, speaking of psyches, Cedrick, you're sitting there with a very ominous look in your eye, Umar Johnson-like. So I'm assuming you're not, are you not agreeing with what's being said here?
Johnson.
As someone that works in the DEI world, how does this white privilege discourse come up in your job? And do you have to Umar your white coworkers?
Well, two quick things before I answer. One is, since you're recording from your phone, you were talking about your dating experience at the beginning. All I kept thinking was, I pray that you don't have a Shannon Sharp moment. Whoever Michelle is in Mexico. I'm just like, not today, Lord.
No devices are allowed in my room for that one reason. So there you go.
If you see This Is Revolution go live at like 4 in the afternoon, you just see an ominous like door halfway open. So hopefully I don't happen. And the other thing I was going to say before I responded was, if I'm the good Cedrick, then can we start normalizing that our good friend Dr. Reed, the elder Reed, is the good Adolf? Because he's a good one.
maybe we should start doing that. Maybe we should start talking about Adolf as a good Adolf, and Cedrick Johnson. We'll start talking about him like Elijah Muhammad, like the Honorable Cedrick Johnson.
Yeah, I'm sure Elder Reed would love that. Yeah. So with the white privilege stuff, yeah, I was just sitting back listening. I'm a huge fan of Hadass's work. I think the first time, Hadass, were you a part of that debate with I believe you were with Walter Benjamin Michaels and Walter Ben Michaels, sorry, and Eduardo Bonilla Silva.
Yeah, and Ashley Jardina.
Yeah,
yeah.
So I've known of Hadass since that debate because I'm a sociologist by training, and Eduardo Bonilla Silva's work is like one of these standards when it comes to the sociology of race and ethnicity. And I think it was in that debate that I finally felt like I had some of the language to point to my own sort of intuitive, Walter Benjamin, I screwed up, to point to my own intuitive, like, this is messed up and this don't work. And so it was in that debate, and it was also in the case for race reductionism that I was like, all right, there's this community of people who obviously begin with the premise that racism exists, but it doesn't follow that all of the remedies that folks are talking about are actually effective or are actually going to produce the outcomes that we care about. So, and it was in that debate, I don't know if you remember, Hadass, that Eduardo Bonilla Silva, when he was being pressed on the point about white privilege discourse, he mentioned at some point that, even when I'm talking to sort of normal people, we got to organize, even when I'm talking to everyday folks, I don't even bring up white privilege discourse. And that's when I was like, okay, so like we're actually on the same page here. that for those who try to think about this with some level of depth and just aren't taking scripts that we get from HR departments or from Oprah's book list or article list or whatever the smaller version of that in our local communities is, like there actually is space now to acknowledge that that like white privilege seminars are not going to have the outcome or have the effect that a lot of people seem to think that it is, which is sort of like almost like a religious conversion experience where people could go like, I was blind, but now I see, after reading Unpacking the White Privilege Knapsack, whatever the hell it's called.
Yeah.
But like before 2018, 2019, it just really didn't seem like there's a lot of space to be honest about those things, or even like have the language to talk about why it's problematic and why it's not effective, because the default was so strong that if you are criticizing white privilege discourse, especially if you're white, then it is sort of like a binary. Then you are basically a victim of false white consciousness or what have you, that you're necessarily feeding into what was often referred to as like colorblind racism at the time. So that's why I definitely appreciated the article that you wrote recently and also the work you were doing before. Having said that, to tie specifically to my work, so I am probably one of the only equity directors that'll ever be on This Is Revolution. So thanks for having me. But one of the reasons why I took the job as a sociologist, and wanted to take this job as a sociologist, was because when I saw a lot of people reading that freaking white fragility book from Robin DiAngelo, which I got to say, you and I look like the Robin DiAngelo, Ibram Kendi that this revolution could afford. But be rest assured, y'all, that's not us.
I think Hadass is. When was the last time we had a white woman on the show?
Gosh, it's an honor. It's an honor.
We used to have white people or white women on the show, and I think Toussaint banned them.
No. I banned Robin
him. It was like
DiAngelo.
No, you banned all white women. It was a hair band. It was a hair band. She was like, if you've never used a pressing comb or a hot comb, she said you can't come on the show. She also banned Asians as well.
Okay.
Was it around the same time that we found out that buttered pecan ice cream was a symptom?
Yeah, it was for specific.
Was that like back-to-back episodes?
I still get triggered by that idea of like niggas only eating butter pecan ice cream. I don't know any Negroes, and there's a whole bunch in my family. My father's like one of 10, and I've never seen any of them Negroes like push someone out the way for some butter pecan ice cream. It's the goofiest shit I ever heard in my life.
Just kidding. But
just pinky out free Negroes running around the Bay Area.
As you can tell, we can be very politically incorrect on this podcast. So
then I'm at home. We're good.
Wouldn't that be some shit if this is diversity training from Hadass Silver?
we usually try to send a disclaimer out to people that have real jobs, like, hey, you might not want to tell your coworkers to watch this because there's going to be some dick jokes interjected with a whole bunch of racism. And it's not ironic. I really do hate all these people we talk about.
I will bury this. Thank you.
There you go. Don't share your socials.
So the last thing I'll say that's actually answering your question now is oh Lord, okay. Dizzle McFizzle on something. All right, so
that's a character that we have here on the show. It's Pog Chaser MLK, because Toussaint said that Martin Luther King liked thick white women.
Yeah.
It's there's also his cohort, which is Malcolm X, that tries to stop MLK from looking at white women with fat asses. And then there's racist Slick Rick. So yeah.
Y'all crazy. But the short answer, finally answer your question is that when I got the job, part of what got me interested was seeing that people were using White Fragility, the book, as a Bible, almost. Like, all right, this is the script that we could use. And then just like, I remember just thinking that, thinking two things. One, that there's just going to be a lot of people who are going to take advantage of the moment that we were in, that y'all call the Great Awakening, read the book and start pumping out these quote unquote diversity trainings, making money, just sort of regurgitating some of the key points in the book. And I think because it tapped so much into some of that psychology stuff, that in some ways it tapped into people wanting to find ways to resolve their guilt. But the other thing that I thought was that if you have a bunch of people who are in DEI positions, which to me is just like who have a platform to talk about how to understand the reality of racism, but to promote courses of action and strategies that actually address the material realities for people, which includes people of color, that if people use that as their playbook, or some of the white privilege discourse broadly as their playbook for doing that work, then it's going to have the consequences of mainly just so much misunderstanding. And I hate the word division, so I'll just say so much conflict over what even the language sounds like and what the arguments sound like. And if you have to unpack so much for people to even get what the argument is supposed to really be getting at, which is what the defenses were with the white fragility stuff, then it stands to reason that it's probably not useful unless your goal is to, unless you don't have any clear goals beyond getting people to think. and that's not particularly useful all the time
But
either.
what if a white person tells me I speak so well in a meeting, or what if in like, you know, I recently wrote about this in the crisis papers that are available. Like I'm not a big fan of AAVE, and what if Hadass sees me on the street and she just yelled out some thing she heard on a rap song, which would be pretty horrible in 2024. She'd probably just yell the N-word at me. If that's the case.
I mean, okay, so this is like so much of the white fragility stuff, and the stuff is simple, like normal. This is how not to be rude to people. And like what I think the focus on of saying someone like, oh, you should or should not say you speak so well, it's condescending to anyone. And there's this idea that you have to be, I think, if you're a white person, you have to monitor yourself and be particularly vigilant about not being rude to Black people, which is the idea that Black people are sensitive, or that there's something that's so different about how you have to interact with Black people versus white people, that you need a separate guide on polite behavior. And that's not to say that people don't do fucked up shit, but what so much of this, like these books are about, are kind of like, you know, it's really messed up to touch Black people's hair. It's, of course, don't touch other people's hair. Like, and it's made to seem.
But what
like
if I just got my dreads done?
Oh, well, then, yeah. Then
what if I'm feeling it? What if I'm feeling, you know, kind of zesty that day? And
then you, right. Of course, then you should. Then you should.
No, is that okay? That's okay. I just want to make sure.
All of this stuff.
Can I touch your? But my question is, I don't mind if you touch my hair. Can I touch your hair? And is it wrong if I smell it?
Okay, so then that's when we get into consent and your Title IX treatment.
So touching the hair is okay. Smelling it could be an assault.
Yes, that's right.
Jason, you get into like Charlemagne territory.
My dream, good Cedric, my dream is to go on that show and just shit on that dude for like a full 3 hours. Just keep reminding, like, hey, you let Larry Elder own you because you're such a fucking moron.
But I'm just saying, both of you talked about smelling something on a woman. So y'all remember that clip when he was like, when girls stand up, he sniffed the chair? Y'all remember that clip?
Did he do that for real?
Yeah.
Oh, don't be a chair sniffer, dude. That's kind of you can't even. Can you hire a chair sniffer and just put him in the bottom of in the basement, or do you just not hire a chair sniffer?
This is a lawsuit instead of This is Revolution.
This is a lawsuit. Paul Prescott. Look at Paul Toussaint. You put Paul's comment on the screen.
Okay.
Paul's comment on the screen. By the way, I don't know if Paul told you, he is a sometimes Y in the vowels that are TIR.
Thank you, Paul.
We are gonna continue to be
responsible.
Someone says if you sniff a chair, you're being sent to. I don't know that is the weirdest shit to me.
Weird.
And I would order that person out. Like, sorry, dude. There's nothing cool about that. That's really.
Hold on, you telling me that Charlemagne sniffed a chair of someone?
He made some comment about like that on Breakfast Club. I'll send you guys the clip. I gotta find it. It was a while ago, but I was like, oh damn.
That's really gross.
Like something
That's
wrong
gross.
with that.
So yeah. It's a little different though if you just give the hair touching back to somebody. It's like, oh hey. Hey Melanie. Nice bob.
Or for you, Michelle, right? Like and Michelle.
What? Black on black hair touching violence. That's how you know that black person wasn't raised in a black house. It's like, oh, you're one of those adopted or half breeds. You're just going around touching black women's hair.
I gotta say,
Um,
I've never had a meeting with a staff member where they touch some child's hair and they're like, "But you people touch each other's hair too." Like that hasn't happened yet. So,
Good to know.
but after you just said it, it might. You giving people the script.
You people touch each other's hair too. And you just, I've never felt the need to touch anyone's hair. Even in the 80s when people had really high bangs, I was always kind of amazed sometimes by how high my Latina sisters could get their bangs. But I never thought to touch it. It just never crossed my mind. And no one's ever, even when I had hair, no one touched it. So maybe I never had good enough hair like Toussaint and Pascal's mom. But let's get down to
stereotyping.
That's the real. You know, if we did a whole show about hair like that, and then brought Hadass in to talk about hair, we'd probably have so many more views, even to just angry niggas.
Josh, you were not prepared for this at all. I can tell.
No, I really wasn't.
I'm glad you admit it, because I wasn't prepared for where we're going right now today either. Because this is like,
and you know the fucked up part about this? I wrote questions. In depth as fuck. We've been on for 38 minutes. I ain't asked near one of them motherfuckers.
Oh.
Now, the rhetoric around privilege frames systemic problems as issues of personal moral failure. How does this individualization of responsibility distort the collective nature of social change? The emphasis on personal renunciation of privilege creates a moral imperative devoid of material analysis, as you say.
Yeah,
Three bald guys discuss hair. Yo, fuck off, Kush. Look.
Yeah, that's not funny.
I like that. I mean, I think you said it in a lot of ways in the question or the statement, I guess, is that this is it, not only is it a project, white privilege is a project that is mainly encouraging you to admit that you have privilege, no matter how much you don't feel it or experience it. So if you're rich, you're supposed to do it. If you're homeless, you're supposed to do it. You're supposed to say, like, I have something that other people don't have if I'm white, right? Like that is the project. But there's this other level to it, which is religious, which is which is that you are also supposed to never stop doing it. Because the minute that you think that you're done renouncing, then you've become privileged again. So it has that religious hook that's like that there's this cyclical thing of confession that you need to do, that you don't just go to confession once and your sins are wiped out, that it's ritualistic. And that then there's no transition, you know. Okay, another beef that I have with a lot of people that I even really admire and like is that they'll end their work by saying we need to do more imagining and reimagining. We need this radical imagination. That is like a huge part of people across the left, is that what we really need is radical imagination. It's like, no. We need like childcare. And it's not very complicated. And other countries do it better than we do it. There's not like a huge amount of imagination that needs to now happen. And so what all these steps are supposed to lead to is that somehow once you're pure, you're going to start radically imagining like crazy. And then we're going to figure out how to organize. So that's the end result, but you never even get to the radical imagining, which doesn't get you anywhere anyway. And I think that is like the religious trajectory the spiritual trajectory, I should say, not religious. It's the spiritual trajectory that you're supposed to go on in these DEI seminars and in reading this and in your white affinity groups. That's the trajectory you're supposed to go on.
White
So you're supposed to
affinity.
you're supposed to silo your whiteness off at some point to be with other white people to meet about. That sounds like a Klan rally.
That's huge. That's a huge thing on college campuses, in progressive religious spaces is your white affinity group. I mean, right? They had like a white women's meeting for Kamala, right? They're supposed to silo yourself off because you are, I mean, I guess toxic, right? You're toxic. And so you have to work
inherently
on yourself. Because otherwise what's going to happen is you're going to ask Black people to explain things to you. And then you're going to put the burden back on the Black people. And we're trying to lift the burden off. That's the whole point. So you can't be interacting with Black people or you're going to burden them.
So do white people in this imaginary world of white people, because you live around, I was waving to a white person earlier, and
I
one of my neighbors, very nice man, very nice man. In this imaginary world of apparently like retarded ass white people, do they ask random Negroes these questions, or specific Negroes? Because I think there should be a hierarchy of Negro that you ask the question to. Because if you're asking Jimmy Walker these questions, you're going to get a real fucked up answer. So who are you asking these Black questions to? So they're not supposed to ask. Like, what if you just say something? There's this movie that came out recently, and I call it The End of the George Floyd Money. It's called the American Society of Magical Negroes. I saw the title and I was like, this sounds stupid. Let me watch it. And I actually paid money to see it. And to me, it was based off of a skit that I found really funny from a show from a guy that's not that funny called Kenya Barris. He produced this sketch comedy show called Astronomica that's on Netflix. It's pretty funny. And they did this as a skit, but it was like an AA meeting of magical Negroes, Whoopi Goldberg and Ghost, Bagger Vance. And their whole reason for life is to assist white people and not really have their own life. So in this movie, these magical Negroes, they kind of take the premise way too fucking far. And it's like white people, when they're uncomfortable, can become violent, and it's a problem. And if your job as a magical Negro is to come in and kind of be a comfortable Black face to make white people calm the fuck down, because if you don't make white people calm down, then they're going to hurt you. And the main character in this movie is this very bourgeois, multi-ethnic Black kid that looks like a stunt double for Wyatt Cenac. And he's uncomfortable around everything and everyone. And he's supposed to be an artist that does yarn art. And he's even uncomfortable within his own art. So what I found really offensive about the film is the premise was white people are inherently always comfortable and cool and just doing all the dope shit. And if you're a Black person that does art especially, then you're an introvert, and maybe your one role in life, maybe you really were meant to be this kind of magical Black nymph who will just make white people comfortable. And I was thinking to myself, I was like, well, I live in Mexico. I'm constantly uncomfortable because I don't speak the language very well. And I'm a new person in a new country. So like any other social setting, if you guys walked into a TIR hangout, it's going to be a little uncomfortable for you because you're going to hear a lot of expletives. There's going to be some weird looking miming going on. And you're going to feel that's how all social interactions are when you are the outsider to a group of people that are friends. But this movie posed it as, no, this is what white people do in nature. And Black people are always the outsider. And I found that like a weird concept. And it's kind of one of those concepts. It's like, did someone from art school do this? And this was their idea of the world? There's these really bourgeois concepts of what white privilege is. that really drives the discourse. And it misses the point that if you think about any novels or movies about people feeling awkward over the last, I don't know, 50 years, they're usually written by a white person who is extremely uncomfortable, you know, in their skin, be it because of their gender or their size or just their class. All that was eliminated in this movie, and it's just about white people in general and them just being really fucking cool, which also is not that true.
It's the default. It's the default belief that whiteness is normalcy, that all normalcy is vested in whiteness, and that everything else needs to be otherized. Now, this is one of the reasons why I don't like this privileged discourse, because it assumes that the default posture of all things that are good and beautiful and lovely and smelling like honeysuckle come from whiteness, and as a result, no, seriously, and that everything else is just doomed unless you ascribe some level of whiteness to yourself. And I, as someone who's a dialectical materialist, I know that the world doesn't work that way. And this is nothing but a liberal attempt to do a form of inclusion, removing any kind of redistribution of wealth into the society. So what you're doing is that you're basically rearranging the deck chairs, so you're allowing a certain percentage of black people into the hierarchy without reintroducing the wealth redistribution into the matrix.
Yeah, I mean, I think that what you said, Pascal, that is the upshot of all of this. That is just it's shuffling the chairs is exactly what it is. But I think beyond just this idea that there's this assumption of whiteness as normalcy, there's an even bigger mistake in some ways I think that is being made, is that there is such a thing as a white normalcy, that there is something that is collectively white other than the experience of not being not white, that there is, and that whiteness is completely class laden. And so it just takes this class thing and it calls it whiteness. And so there's this other maneuver that is making whiteness and equating it with a class thing that makes the white working class completely invisible in the conversation and makes any type of class disparities among non-whites completely invisible in the conversation too.
Well, that's the whole thing, right? It's just this idea that, again, inherently there's like white privilege even amongst the unhoused. I actually had an argument with a friend literally where I'm sitting right now, because he was telling me, no, dude, homeless people are treated different. I was like, I literally worked in a homeless shelter. That's not true.
Also, who cares? Like, not who cares about that, but if a black homeless person and a white homeless person are being treated somewhat differently, I guarantee you they both want shelter and they both want food. And like you trying to figure out how to be more polite is your own issue. Like that's your own problem of you feeling weird in that situation. That's how I feel about it a little bit of like, if you want to, we could spend time trying to figure out how to treat homeless white people and homeless black people the same.
The police have a great way of doing it. Trust me.
It's true. Exactly. We figured it out. You're right. We kind of figured out how to do it.
Yeah, police are we're just gonna fucking beat the shit out of all you guys. We don't give a fuck.
Yeah.
This is a very good comment. As an Asian person, the white privilege discourse is especially obnoxious, as there's a lot of Asian Americans internalizing white privilege and white guilt because we're white adjacent.
Jordan Peele makes that point in Get Out. For people that don't know that, if you know the auction, there's an Asian person at the auction because he does feel that Asian people are white adjacent.
Oh, I forgot.
And there is, a lot of people do forget that part because he doesn't try to hammer it home. But in an interview, I didn't know if it was one of those things that just happened because of casting or if it was something he purposely wanted. And in an interview, he goes, no, it's something I purposely wanted there because I do believe that they are adjacent to this level of privilege. And that's like, okay, well, all Asians? because I got some real bad news to tell you about people that escaped like war-torn genocides in the 70s. They live in abject poverty and they are in prisons at a pretty high rate.
Well,
Only the crazy rich ones.
Crazy from China, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, all of this is just to show very straightforwardly, like all of this discourse, all of it depends on these insane simplifications that try to equate experience on top of race, which is not how the world works, and it's the project of the right to try to do that. That's not the project of progressives ever, to try to say that your race is going to completely dictate your experience regardless of what other experiences you might have or what your class status is. It doesn't matter if you're Vietnamese or you're Indian. It doesn't matter what generation you're here. It's all going to be the same experience. And if you're Asian, you're going to be grouped into one category or the other, white adjacent or non-white adjacent, depending on what's politically expedient, because that's what racial categories do, is they make things expedient in that way.
Yeah, so much of this just reminds me of like when I was reading your piece too, of the telephone game. Like at first there was core arguments or arguments that were being made that were at least practical in the sense of there was a goal and this was one of various strategies to try to reach that goal. And more you have people passing on the language of what was originally described, but so many different things get left off the table because the pragmatism point in that context gets lost. Like when you're playing the telephone game amongst different groups, if the goals are not consistent and the objectives are not consistent, then the things that are going to fall off are going to be the things that have nothing to do with the goals and objectives of the next group that's passing the baton of that rhetoric. And the other thing I would say, and that's why, for example, like some of this discourse reminds me of, like, I remember asking my friend, I was like, why does the world more and more, or at least the country, seem more and more like a bad grad seminar where like a lot of people actually didn't read the book or the article, but they got like some of the language from the abstract, and then the discussion about what makes sense and what doesn't is flowing from the key words that were in the abstract instead of the core arguments of the text and the context in which folks were making those arguments. And if you view it in that light, that this is basically just carbon copies of being passed on from people who are just taking basically the abstract of the abstract of the abstract to try to make a point, then a lot of it starts to make sense. And that's why I love the book Racecraft. I mean, the book, shout out to Barbara Fields and rest in peace to Karen Fields. Like when I read Racecraft, even though it took me forever to get it, especially after reading that chapter on race and witchcraft, like that chapter 5 or chapter 6, I was like, this is hard as hell. But but a good way of thinking about racecraft and the way I talk about it with people now is when kids in the United States, when we raise a bunch of our kids to believe in Santa Claus, those kids will start to not only draw on the rhetoric, the stories, the examples that reinforce the idea that Santa Claus exists, that already exists, but they will also start to conjure up their own storylines, testimonies, examples, explanations that flow from the premise that Santa Claus exists. And in that terrain, it makes sense to them because of that repetition and because of those pragmatic needs. And similarly, our Santa Claus for most of the country is the belief that racial differences are not social fictions, as you mentioned, but they are social facts, and that they are objective realities. And people may say, well, race is socially constructed, but so much of the rhetoric and so much of the arguments still flow from the premise that there are inherent racial differences that are mostly immutable. And so part of what our job is, and I think part of what my job is too, specifically with the work that I do, is to get people to see that so much of what we do and so much of how we behave is still operating under the premise that some Santa Claus that we believe in still exists, and we have to accept the brute fact and the unfortunate reality that racial differences is a Santa Claus because it obscures the brute reality that that exploitation, discrimination, and so many other forms of violence, but then also even some of the things like disrespect and ignorance and egocentrism are products of people choosing to do crappy things in context, and that we are failing to disrupt some of those patterns or to change our behavior, mostly because we are just resigning. Because a lot of us are just lazy when it comes to inequality.
Toussaint and Pascal, you guys are Haitian. Is there a Haitian Santa Claus?
No, I don't know.
No, but I would like to say Pascal's mom is light skinned, so she has light skin privilege.
Oh,
He is a beneficiary of it.
Oh man,
They get discounts at Chick-fil-A.
there is a colorism. Look, there's a colorism discourse that that is really picking up steam with a bit of a younger generation, where it's this idea that your adjacentness to whiteness means you're going to get treated differently. What say you guys about the prevalence of these discussions that have seeped through the realm of pop culture? Michelle Alexander had a book, I guess it was 15 years old now, The New Jim Crow. And that book actually led to a very, very much watched documentary called 13th that says that it's the 13th Amendment and there's a direct line through that in mass incarceration, and that white people are just the collateral damage of mass incarceration. Couple that with also the same filmmaker made the documentary When They See Us that comes out around the time of Trump's early years in office. His time in office is kind of this magical time of pop culture discourse around racial difference, where white privilege discourse really gets propped up. And then I think it gets shot to the stratosphere in 2020 during the George Floyd protests, because the only lens in which we can see police violence is the lens of white people behaving badly, which is interesting because in Miami, where Pascal does reside, a case that has, for me in the sports world, has drawn up some interesting attention, but I haven't seen too many people in this space talk about it. I think it's the fact that a lot of people here are nerds and they're afraid of sports. But Tyreek Hill, a wide receiver for the Miami Dolphins, superstar wide receiver for the Miami Dolphins, was driving his very nice car, and even he admits was a little rude to police, but that rudeness, and I agree, did not call for their reaction. But all the cops he dealt with, none were white.
you're Latino.
And there's other cases around the country of motherfuckers getting beat to death on body cam, and none of the officers that are doing it are white. And those cases, of course, don't get the same sort of traction. It was about a year ago, we had the case of Jordan Neely, the young black man that was having an episode on a public transit that got subdued but choked out. And because, if you don't know what you're doing, you probably shouldn't try to touch people, and killed him on a train. But that's a white guy and a black guy. That got all of the oxygen literally the same week in San Francisco. a black trans man got killed by a black security guard scuffling over stealing, a few things. And of course, the security guard didn't get charged with anything. It's almost as if the privilege discourse becomes one that is just this intoxicant that we refuse to see any of the material realities.
Yeah.
You want to say something?
I think, Oh, sorry. No, am I interrupting?
No, please. No, you're not.
So I think that what I feel frustrated in academia, and I still feel kind of confused about how it has become so popular publicly, is that there's no relationship to pragmatism. So the question isn't like it's how do you want to talk about these things and think about things so they change? To me, that should be the driving force between your approach to anything concerning justice, is a desire that it changes. So sure, you could focus on the incidences in which there's some evidence of a white cop being racist, and then that could be the main thing that you push against, and you can think that that's going to be the main difference. But if you have an analysis where you're not focusing on white privilege, there is more space to think about the fact that there aren't enough social workers. There aren't enough that, the main people who get attacked by police are mentally ill in some way. That's the main group that gets attacked by police. So that there's not any training and tactics by the right people to deal with that. So when you take away the white privilege, it's not saying, because I don't acknowledge that it happens to Black people differently or more in more situations or in some cities or whatever. It says I actually think it's a problem. And I'd like to think about what the solutions are. And that's going to be the thing that's going to drive how I consider this issue.
Pascal?
Totally.
Go, sir.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I was going to say, I totally agree. The pragmatism piece is, to me, like where I default to when I talk to people who, in my line of work, sometimes criticize what I do and how I do it because they believe I should be following the script that many of us are criticizing. And my answer usually is, like, what is one trying to accomplish? And for me, with the goals that I have, these are the best strategies and tactics to reach those goals. And we can only debate which one's right, which one's wrong, which one makes the most sense, which is going to be an empirical question. But we can debate that if we have the same goals and objectives. But I think a lot of us talk as if we do, and we don't. And I think Hadass is correct that so much of the conversations end up being separated from pragmatism because instead the conversations are more geared towards self-purification and trying to position oneself as higher on the moral totem pole than other people. And I got to say, the more that conversations about what happens, how, and why, the more that it sounds like astrology, the more we should treat it like astrology. Like when people treat racial identifiers in the same way that people treat Capricorns and and I don't even know Aquarius is. The more that even if putting aside the fact that it's the same premise that white supremacists use, but even if that doesn't convince you, it's like the more that it sounds like that, like the astrology conversations, the more it should be treated as a form of magical thinking. And the key question should be, what are the imperatives that are enabling so many people to talk and act as if that Santa Claus actually exists? And that to me that's the very interesting question. Is like, what is it about this moment at this time with the imperatives of driving so many people to want to talk and act as if these things are true, while also accepting that the premise that racism exists is not being questioned by myself or Hadass. And I think in order to hold on to some of this magical thinking, people have to believe that what we're saying is that racism doesn't exist. And that's not true. Like, racism does exist. I work in K through 12 education. I can tell you some of the most blunt, overt forms of racism still exist and persist. But it doesn't follow that the strategies and tactics for action on that fact are necessarily the white fragility seminars and using sort of white fragility as your Bible, or I remember one time I called it, because I still think it's true, like it's like the opium of the bourgeoisie. Like, that's basically what a lot of this discourse is.
Damn.
And I think with the goal thing that you're talking about is that where this division comes in is your goal to celebrate race, to acknowledge that there are different experiences and then celebrate them. Is that the ultimate goal? Is that what we're trying to achieve, or is it trying to have some form of equality and humane treatment across the board? And I think that the driving goal in mainstream discourse, and a lot of people who consider themselves progressive, is that celebrating and is our target. That's what we want to do first and foremost.
I think some people want to have their cake and eat it too in that question. They want to do the celebration of the difference, and they want to maintain the racial justice equality element as well.
That's absolutely true.
Yeah, and they want to be seen as part of, like, the right party, and so that's why so much of the language of discourse that catches on mirrors the same talking points that are promoted by corporate executives, foundations, and politicians, specifically in the Democratic Party. And it actually takes a lot of work for individuals and for groups to deviate from what is popular at that time and what is considered to be the morally righteous script for talking about and doing things, especially in the workplace. I remember telling people when I started my job that that part of what gets in our way for when we try to talk about, again, legit instances of disrespect, racism, discrimination, what have you, is that, like, we have to believe that a lot of people in the workplace, and let's say at a white fragility seminar at a corporation, that it's going to be practical for a bunch of people to admit that they've said and done racist things while their bosses, managers, supervisors, and colleagues are all in the same room. And so, like, and the people who do that are sometimes the ones that I'm most afraid of. I'm like something I know Toure and I joke sometimes about how sometimes the people who love this discourse so much are more similar to the Miss Morellos from Everybody Hates Chris.
Right.
And they're the ones who wear the badge of I'm anti-racist, I support diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is why it's so important for us in this space, including Hadass as well, to confront that nonsense as well, because it ends up being the sound bites, the scripts, the language that then gets uplifted by folks who don't like any of the work that we're trying to do on the far right. That gets uplifted as like a totem for what any egalitarian projects are. And so it's just like on a team. Well, one, we're not even on the same team oftentimes, but it's like, if we want to have our arguments be persuasive, part of what we have to do is do a really good job of differentiating and showing how the things that people think may sound like they're trying to say the same things as us, or we're all on the same team and this is infighting. Actually, we're not in the same team. We're not in the same project, because our goals are very, very different.
I have a question.
Toussaint?
Yeah. So for a brief part of your essay, you spoke about rights versus privileges. We got this comment from Pascal
Yeah.
Well, another Pascal. Race, sex, class are all parts of the problem. There is male privilege, white privilege, rich privilege. Like George Carlin said, there are no such things as rights. There are only privileges. What do you
Please
say?
don't quote George Carlin and come on this show. That's what I have to say first and foremost. I'm not a big George Carlin fan. If you're quoting a comedian, you're not a serious person.
I think that this is why would we want to cede that territory? Why would we? I mean, why would we want to go pre-enlightenment with all of this and think that
That's why
aren't?
you don't listen to comedians.
Yeah, it's just. I mean, it's just. I mean, beyond the fact that George Carlin isn't a great necessarily guide to an egalitarian revolution. Beyond that, just this idea of framing rights as privilege is ceding ground to all enemies of equality and egalitarianism. We are like framing not being beaten up by an officer as a privilege does not make sense to me. Framing our incarceration system and being spared it doesn't make sense to me. Being able to afford preschool as a privilege also doesn't make sense to me. I don't see why that would be an egalitarian project rather than saying I am being fucked over by not getting these things because I live in society and I'm entitled to these things. Like, I don't get that. It seems like, I obviously don't like white privilege discourse.
But my problem with comedian discourse, that people go, yeah, they have a point. First of all, satirists don't really have to have their ideas challenged. You're on a stage with a microphone and you observe things, right? Don't you hate it when white people do blah, blah, blah? I fucking do. Everybody does. Chris Rock, to me, is the perfect example of this. In the mid-90s, he really gains prominence with his niggas and black people bit. And I actually quote it in the Why I Hate AAVE piece, which it sounds like a lot of people that don't like this discourse probably really love the idea of AAVE, which is so fucking offensive. But and I know you're younger, Hadass. In the 90s, Chris Rock did this bit where he was like, who's more racist, black people or white people? He goes, black people, because black people hate black people too. Fee, fa, fo, figure, boy, I hate a nigga. And he goes, people go, no, it's not black people. It's the media. It's the media's portrayal of black people on TV that have people afraid, but black people in general aren't violent. He goes, no, that's not true. Because when I'm going to the ATM at night, I'm not looking for Walter Cronkite. I'm looking for niggas. Every time you try to have something nice in the black community, it is black people that get it shut down. Now, that rhetoric that he spewed, that everybody loved, that made him, got him TV shows and movie deals, multiple more comedy specials, literally puts him on a pantheon of comedians. And I do find Chris Rock funny, but there's no difference in that than Bill Cosby and the pound cake speech. What the hell was he stealing the pound cake for in the first place? Right?
Yeah.
Did you want to say something, Cedrick?
No, I'm saying you're right. Yeah, there is no difference.
It's Thomas Sowell, man. It's the same. It's the same.
It is Thomas Sowell.
I think like I'm with you. I mean, there's this Onion headline that said like white guy spoils his white privilege on job at Best Buy. And I do think that basically I didn't need to write my essay after I saw that. So sometimes comedy can say it better and more clearly. I mean, because some of the shit that is taken for granted is silly, and I can appreciate that, but it is not the platform by which we figure out actual moves on how to make
popularity is not organic either. Like so much of what becomes. I remember somebody posted that that was so funny that the New York Times bestsellers list is the new COINTELPRO. I thought that was so funny. They said that right when How to Be Anti-Racist and White Fragility were the top 2 books in the nation, and I think though, like even books like Jody Melamed's Represent and Destroy, it kind of makes a similar argument too in some ways. But the broader point is that even what is popular, even what takes on resonance as and is framed and normalized as common sense is not sort of organic. It is a function of what is if uplifted and promoted with people by institutions and by folks specifically who have power and money to uplift those narratives. And that's not, you don't have to go into the conspiracy thinking of the Illuminati and all that nonsense to believe that. It really is just a function of, like, if you just take a normal workplace, that what is repeated and framed and promoted as common sense and what is reasonable thinking tends to flow from broader culture, but also tends to flow from what is legitimized and promoted by the bosses and by the managers, and the incentive for a lot of people to at least stay in line with those scripts is just the coercive nature of being in the workplace. And that's why it's so important for all of us to have some humility and think, is this true simply because I believe it? Or is this true because there is substantial evidence to believe it? And if there is substantial evidence to believe it, that's also tied to the question of what's the most practical strategy for even trying to talk about this thing or promote this type of action in this context. And once that pragmatism is gone, then it ends up being the same silliness that you would see on ESPN when people are talking about football in ways that are usually flow from the people they have access to.
We have this comment from Drunk Dalek, and I like you guys' response to it. I came in late, but has the massive pessimism around the discourse been mentioned? Like, a lot of the focus on symbolic stuff is because they don't believe real world change is truly possible.
I think if I'm understanding the question right, in part it's getting at like what is the attraction to all this? Like why are people into it? And I do think that massive pessimism is huge, but just in my anecdotal experience, the pessimism is more something I see when I'm like knocking doors in working class neighborhoods. That's where I see pessimism more, that nothing's going to change. Less so than people going to white privilege seminars. They're optimistic, and I think they're more optimistic. And I think there's this incentive just in the nature of you're not giving up any real material resources by renouncing your white privilege. It's not a focus on redistribution is part of the attraction. It is something that you feel. And if you genuinely giving some humanity to people who go to it, like if you're upset about the world and the way it is, and you feel like, oh, I can do something by looking inside and cleansing myself, then great. Then you actually have some agency. But I am still mystified a little bit why people like to be told they're bad. Like, and that is a lot of this. And I still haven't wrapped my head around that. Like, why is it that there's a large contingent of white, mainly middle class people who want to be told that they're shitty? I don't know what that's about. Maybe you guys know, but.
Toussaint?
I don't know. Is that like an influence of Christianity? It sounds
Maybe.
very Catholic specifically.
Yeah.
The need to cleanse and confess and have contrition and all of that sort of thing.
Yeah. I definitely think that's like, it's of the same flavor. It has the same type of attraction for sure.
Yeah, I haven't thought of that.
There is yeah, go ahead, sorry.
I was like, yeah, I think it. Somebody said a kink. I don't know about that, but I do think that part of why some of this takes resonance is because there is a basic truth or a basic reality that is true, which is that as human beings we're imperfect, and I think what drives some of this is a desire to reckon with the fact that we are imperfect because like we are not all knowing, and because we're products of our experience. And when somebody is offering or selling some idea or some program or something that says you can resolve that dissonance of you're trying to be a good person and do right by people you care about, and yet you're an imperfect human being, that somebody's selling something as a way to resolve that dissonance that's on the cheap,
Yeah.
especially, then I think that that's one reason why it's gonna take resonance or take some, yeah, it's gonna have some resonance. Along with, I do think the decline in Christianity and church going as a way to talk about the reality of we're imperfect human beings, that people end up looking for some type of alternative that has sort of similar vibes or similar sort of storytelling, which is why I think in some ways, I'm not gonna lie, I think in some ways some of the far right folks who are against the DEI industry, I think part of it comes from a general imperative that people are going less and less to their churches and more to these stadiums packed with or affinity groups or whatever that are led by HR managers, motivational speakers, and self-improvement speakers, the Oprahs of the world, and DEI folks are just oftentimes just a subgroup of that broader category.
Yeah.
I mean, does it ever feel to you, like, kind of to that point, though, that that's a religion for a certain class of people, though, that do like the confession and the
No
flogging?
question.
Because you do have a growing population of white people that are now being kind of forced out of middle class. Maybe they lost their property during 2008, like a lot of other people. Maybe they have the same problem with that a lot of people are having right now: family members selling family homes to afford healthcare because of things like dementia, which is an extremely expensive condition to try to reckon with. And as this growing ranks, as these white people grow in the ranks of economically disenfranchised, and this rhetoric just keeps getting regurgitated over and over again, which is you have to cleanse yourself of your privilege, and you look around and go, what privilege? And it's like, well, the privilege of, look, Tyreek Hill, you're never going to get Tyreek killed. And it's like, maybe I do get Tyreek killed. Maybe I won't get Tyreek Hill, but I'm about to get evicted.
Yeah.
And then, then I'll get Tyreek killed in a whole different way. I won't be able to call my lawyer up and have this be a national news story and sue a police department. I'll just get my ass kicked, and that'll just be what it is.
I mean, that's the cleanest way to express what this project ultimately is it's working class white people and non-white people. You don't have something in common. And it's the same thing that, like, you get Calhoun saying in the South, before the Civil War. It's that poor white people, you're better off. It's the same thing. You're better off. And you can say you're better off and that's great. Or you can say you're better off and you shouldn't be better off. But the same thing you're saying is, poor white people, you're better off and you don't have things in common with poor black people.
And also, don't forget, you're also going to have a whole army of PMC blacks who are going to say, yeah, and those white working class are always going to be racist. You can never trust them. And they're always going to be in the ear of poor working class of blacks saying, don't trust those whites, but you can trust us, even though we've been betraying you for over a century.
Right. That's part of it too.
Yeah. What I see in my world is the people who tend to, I think I said earlier, the people who tend to like really almost have like the ones who actually do kind of have a religious conversion experience and want to preach the gospel of white privilege discourse are some of the ones who worry me a lot more than other people. But putting those folks aside, I do think that a lot of the people who keep going for more, that there is, especially when it's done bad, I should say, that they tend to also be the people who want to aspire to rise up the bureaucratic ladder. So folks who aspire to be managers, and if they are managers, people who aspire to go up the ranks of management, and if learning this language and these scripts, because part of what differentiates professions is the scripts that they use and language they use, is if part of access to um, uh, 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 the capital, the social capital you need to rise up those ranks, if part of that is knowing the language, knowing the scripts, then in some ways, even if it's not conscious for some people, part of what's happening is like that desire to obtain those scripts to be viewed as a trustworthy potential manager. I think that's also part of what drives it too. So in other words, if using some of this language is then received as encoded by hiring committees as proof of someone being trustworthy and not being essentially a risk when they're interacting with other employees, then it follows that we should expect that people who sort of seem and acknowledge that they're sort of locked or do not want to aspire to raise up the ranks of management, that they're going to ask the simple question of why should I care? And
Yes.
on the practical question, if you don't have a good answer for it, and if the answer is just, well, it's good to reflect, or it's good to open up your imagination, or whatever, like Hadass was saying earlier, that doesn't cut it for most people. So then, because then it just seems like there's some ulterior motive that you're not sharing. And that's why I think for the few of us who know that this is true, why we get so agitated by this, because some people do have platforms to try to do the right thing and to try to help people build solidarity in such a messed up world with so many messed up things happening. And the fact that a lot of people are using that megaphone or using that space to promote scripts and logics that move us away from our goal of a more egalitarian society. I think that's just what's so frustrating.
Yeah, that's.
Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead. Just
I was trying to let a black woman speak, okay?
yeah.
I don't have anything lined up, but I don't know if you want to address some of what's going on in the chat. No, literally, no one said that racism doesn't exist. Do you want to hammer the point home again?
That's just, you can that? If you don't say that's the problem with this discourse. This discourse gets to come from a definitely a place of a certain amount of privilege, because it becomes your big problem is this idea that it's just white people holding you back from anything that you want to do in life. It's kind of like that movie, that Magical Negro movie, where again you have this uber bougie black kid that gets to make yarn art. Just sit down for a second and think about how many fucking people you know drive Uber and Lyft to exist. There's people that live in my neighborhood right now that in Mexico that drive in the States, that sleep in their car for 3 to 4 days at a time to drive well over 10 to 12 hours to make just enough to live in a country where the standard of living is a lot less, right? Mm-hmm. And this movie is about a kid that does yarn art that went to RISD. Mm-hmm. That person exists, but this is why Bert Cooper's paper in Current Affairs was so important. Who gets to tell the stories about poor black people? In the 70s, it was Jews. No, just kidding. It was white people. Right? It was all that Norman Lear stuff.
This is my exit. That's what it's going to be called now.
Right? It was all that Norman Lear stuff. And then Bill Cosby comes on the scene and goes, no. Guess what? And Spike Lee come on the scene. And the two things those two wanted to do, because they both come from a certain amount of black bourgeois privilege, is to say, not all of us live in the projects. And that's true. But then that becomes the dominant story. And no one ever talks about where the rest of these writers come from. They come from elite universities and institutions. And they are part of the same cadre of elite people that have been writing this shit for years. But they are a different hue. Ergo, it's authentic. So if this uber well-to-do person goes, I'm a kind of a nerd and cool white people don't get me, I'm gonna make a whole fucking movie about it because I got my George Floyd money. Like, that shouldn't be the dominant narrative, but that becomes the way in which most people want to see this discourse, only through the lens of a certain privileged person and their interactions.
Yeah, it's
Jason
almost like if I was talking to, I'm guessing like a lot of this coming from whoever Chris H is, like if I was sitting next to them, what I would say is that like it kind of reminds me of when you're trying to tell somebody, like when I'm like 7 years old, I'm trying to tell a friend, yo, Santa Claus doesn't exist. And then they go, what do you mean Santa Claus doesn't exist? And I'm like, no, like parents or guardians or whoever buy the gifts, purchase them, and they're not produced by elves, they're produced by Walmart, or not Walmart, but they're produced by factories and unfortunately a lot of child labor. And then they say, but no, I know Santa Claus. Are you saying that the gifts don't exist under the tree? And you're like, I'm not. It's almost like in a world where like people believe witchcraft exists and like they believe that like the evil eye is what caused a flood or caused a drought or caused somebody to die, because now we're getting to the emotional content that drives so much of why it's hard for people to not hear what we're saying right now. Is that like if I was to say no, like witchcraft is BS, and the reason why the drought or the flood happened has to do more so with science than the evil eye, they'll say, well, why are you denying the fact that the flood had awful consequences or the drought had awful consequences for folks who are growing crops and folks who own houses or whatever? Or why are you denying the fact that that person died? You're insulting that person's family by denying their pain. And it's like, no, I'm not saying that they didn't die. I'm just saying that the evil eye wasn't what caused it. And part of what protects the discourse, and part of how we know it's an ideology, is that that people here debate about the causes as a denial of the outcome, because that's the binary thinking of ideology.
With this idea of the ideology part of it is also when you have a script that you need to say for people to think you're a good person and that you're someone that they can work with. When you have to say, first, if I had to say, if you guys want me to say when I come on, hi, Hadass, I'm white. Here's my background, here's my privilege, and now you guys know that I'm safe. Like, rather than having some kind of sense that you can recognize when someone wants to fight for something because they're doing it, they're trying, and because they're putting in the work, or because like they're being halfway decent, when there's a script that you're supposed to follow before someone can trust you like that, then that's also ideology at work.
Yeah,
that's the pure.
But Hadass, there's one very important thing that you're leaving out. Did you walk in with a black dude? Did you walk in with a black dude?
Well, I packed my knapsack.
Just know if you're gonna do the speech and you walk in with a black dude, you can't walk in with a halvesy. It has to be a whole black dude.
Okay.
Any halvesies? Halvesies, eliminate all halvesies. They don't count.
Purification, get rid of halvesies.
Yes.
It's written down.
Halvesies. No East Asians.
No East Asians.
No, and El Salvadorians, Central Americans, and up. That's it. No South Americans. Too much privilege there.
Okay, I just keep them as friends.
Exactly. You can bring in an Argentinian, and people might think it's cool, but it's not. It's just not.
Argentine.
It's not cool. So, yeah.
And I'll add to Hadass's point that part of like what holds ideology in place too, with those scripts that you mentioned, is that is that once you accept that the binary that you believed in was wrong, then you have to face some of the immense guilt of, oh crap, I bullied a lot of people who were trying to say what they're saying, and now I got to go back and apologize. And that's not conscious. Your brain is like, I don't want to face the reality of like some of the things I did based on that belief was true. And that's just cognitive dissonance. So I don't even get frustrated when people say that anymore. I'm like, you're dealing with some cognitive dissonance. And part of what I'll just ask that person to think through is like, what is it about what they gain emotionally or what they gain materially from continuing that script that it's so hard for them to not with the premise that racism like it's similar to folks who hear what we say as of or as we're trying to take their resources from people who deserve it, like that zero sum thinking. It's just the zero sum thinking on amongst liberals.
Yeah, that most of us have to compete with each other, and that there's nothing it's austerity, that we got to work within the confines of austerity, and that's the starting premise, rather than why are we dealing with austerity in the first place.
And if you say anything that deviates from that line, then you don't care about the most disadvantaged.
Yeah, exactly.
Good point, Pascal.
No, I'm appreciating this conversation. That's very fulfilling. I had nothing to say.
Well, come to my diversity training. I'm just kidding.
So Cedrick, I'm curious, have you gotten pushback with like trying to have a not privileged, white privilege, or a like focus in DEI, like being the person in this world? And where does that come from? Like, who's driving that?
I think a lot of people who were facilitators of trainings or people who were part of the protests, and then sometimes part of the riots too, that part of their consciousness raising in that time period was wrapped up in this is the party line. And then sometimes, like when I first started doing this, I was kind of a jerk, because I was like, well, if I accept everything that you're saying about white fragility, then you don't have a leg to stand on at all. Like, if everything is true about whiteness and how it sort of prevents you from being able to see the reality of racism, and it prevents you from having any practical reason to work with me to do anything to address the needs of other people of color, including myself, then you actually have no standing to say anything. You have no standing to disagree with me. And that's a very illiberal view. And I think that, but that hurt people's feelings. I'm not gonna lie. But
well, the only response to that, right, is that, well, and this happens, right, is that you're not authentically Black. That's
you're not Black.
100%. Oh yeah.
If 100% wants to disagree with you in this context, then, well, you're not really you're not the Black person that counts.
And that's why I think Touré a lot at work. I think Touré because he was the first one that brought up that sometimes the people who are most emotionally tied to this rhetoric come from the same ilk of Miss Morello. Because Miss Morello would also be the type that would be like, well, then you're not really Black. Or Joe Biden, you ain't Black if you don't vote for me, right? So, and like so I think that 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 was the line that I used previously, but just on a more, I think in a more, what do you call it, pragmatic approach to some of the pushback for me has been that just asking the question, or questioning, having an inquiry mindset of, all right, so what are you trying to accomplish? What am I trying to accomplish? Based on what we're trying to accomplish, now let's compare. Let's see if we're even on the same page with what we're trying to accomplish. And then now, and what our non-negotiables are. Now let's look at strategy A and strategy B. And once we look at strategy A and strategy B, give me the space to show the evidence, and not just my experiential evidence, because I think part of what adds to the anti-intellectualism in this country is the belief that experience in of itself is a basis for determining truth, but or that conflation of subjective truth and objective truth, and then that being framed as like appreciation of differences. That's nonsense. But once we hear those strategies, give me the space to be able to explain why the strategy that you're talking about, when we've seen this play out in other contexts, it usually has unintended consequences that deviate even from the goal that you laid out. And that's usually how I approach it.
I like it. I mean, the pragmat, my favorite, there's a historian, James Oakes, who works on stuff that's friendly to, I think, our worldview and stuff. And he kind of like you don't want to, if you're fighting the Civil War, you're going to test every Northerner for their white privilege before you let them join the Union. You know, like, is that the kind of criteria you want to start off with? Or do you want to start out with the premise of let's get the best generals and the best fighters to win this war and deal with that, rather than let's make sure that every soldier that we give a gun to is a true anti-racist?
Yep.
Wow. I'm just losing what I want to hear.
Uh-huh.
I guess we'll wrap it up then. So you want to wrap it up?
Let's see.
What happened to Cedrick?
Back really quickly.
We lost him. He's back.
He's back.
They're sort of back.
Why'd you do that? Why'd you do that?
There you go. Oh.
You did that. It's evil. This is the problem with the white discourse. It doesn't talk about black women taking black men off screens. It's a real problem here. That is a real problem.
That's your next show.
It's
You
black
got
Am
it.
I back now? Sick.
Yeah.
I heard most of what you said, Hadass, and like the recent thing I've been doing which is helping a lot more. Two things I've been doing. One is pointing to the brain research, to the research on how our brains work, and how that provides so much good evidence for a materialist perspective, which is that like our brains go towards the things that give us dopamine and goes away from the things that we consider to be threats. And if your reasoning and if your approach to things don't build from at least that premise, and instead builds on the premise that people are going to be completely altruistic as a consequence of a 1 hour training, then you really don't have a basis to a good basis to make an argument for why the alternative approach that I'm talking about is more practical. But more tied to what you said for the second approach is, I just keep telling people, why is it that we keep looking to people who haven't really accomplished much on an organizational or a countrywide level to figure out what do we do to get out of this mess? Like, there wasn't, white privilege seminars wasn't the main tool, part of the main toolkit of the civil rights movement or the labor movement, which are two of the most successful movements in this country, or the abolition movement. And there are some things that are true and that are consistent if we look at folks who have actually accomplished anything. And so I can go to bed at night realizing that the things that I'm pushing are not just coming from my intuition or just coming from my conditioning. It's coming from a practical space of, I want to win. And I want to look at the people who, or the groups of people who have done things that have won benefits or won things that are beneficial for people who are often screwed over in this country. And oftentimes people don't know much about anything about the labor movement or the civil rights movement. but instead they're just going based on the scripts that usually are more self-beneficial and self-interested, or emotionally self-interested, or a function of peer pressure. And part of my job is to at least push them to at least rethink their strategy for developing those strategies. So get them to think or to consider that perhaps there are some answers when we look to history for how we make progress, and not just if we look to the New York Times bestsellers list.
Oof. But isn't the rhetorical win the one that I guess has mattered since the 60s? I was talking to Pascal about this yesterday. It's this idea that, you know, this show, I don't want to say it's founded on, but has become a foundational statement of this show, that Black Power won culturally where it failed politically. This idea of this cultural win, and to be able to rhetorically yell at your quote unquote white opponent, seems to be the battlefield on which people want to play on, because you actually can get, I guess, wins, and those wins don't have to be substantive. They just have to be rhetorical. How do we get beyond these rhetorical wins? That's my big question. What say you, white lady?
Yes. I mean, this is where again I feel like my pushback against kind of radical imagination is that kind of ground organizing work and appealing to people's self-interest and thinking about who's already pushing for the kind of things that would bring greater equality, and the greater equality that would kind of genuinely lift all boats. And that is, I don't know. I mean, we're so far away from it. I guess part of my stumbling here is because this is where my pessimism kicks in, is that there's not, we're not ready to mobilize, so to speak. We're not there, right? Like part of it is like, there's just so much groundwork in terms of, there's a little bit of demystifying of what's been considered the left and progressive since the 60s that needs to happen. And then also, you know, that's the education work. The education work is demystification, I think, first and foremost. But then there's just organizing work. And I don't have any like special map other than look at how people, you know, vote on ballot measures and stuff when they're given the chance, and they want the same shit. And so start with that. Start with the fact that people, when you give the reddest red state a ballot measure, they're going to vote like the blue state, or like a blue state, or like a city. When you give them a chance to say that, and that's where you kind of start with this, and you just appeal to self-interest. Like that's what I feel like, Cedrick, you were saying with dopamine. Like that's what we want. So.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. In the work that I'm doing in my district, like I've gone from trying to put the cart before the horse to now just like my line, or the thing I'm doing with the folks who I work with in, at the different schools in my district, is just saying that if we don't learn have even get comfortable talking to somebody who doesn't already fully agree with us, if we don't even get comfortable with having one-on-one conversations and to figure out what is persuasive and what's not, and then try to go from that to building a semblance of some type of organization or institution that can actually like accomplish anything. If we don't even do that, if we don't even know how to have a conversation with people who disagree with us and make sure it's persuasive, and make sure that we are making appeals that's actually going to work, then most of this is just cosplaying, kind of like the people who in the 70s were just so excited to wear leather jackets because they could feel as if they're part of the Black Power movement. And I don't have time for that.
That's kind of my point, right? You know, Christian Parenti brought it up, and we cut a clip of it on the show he was on, I think last week or week before, where he discussed where a lot of money was going into these like Black community centers and these arts programs where you can make a play about wanting to kill your landlord, but we're really not going to get into any sort of rent control because property is something that we want to protect and we want everyone to grow. And but if these Black kids get to do the hippity hop and you can write songs about your landlord and the conditions in your urban centers, and we'll give you the equipment to do it in. Look at that! Look at that! It's got equipments. That becomes, to me, the epitome of where we are today. This many, like I was telling Pascal, I went off on the rapper Mos Def the other night. Because I believe he's one of these people that comes, we're from the same generation, a generation of people that grows up on this idea that those leather jackets inherently had power in them. And everyone that wore one was some sort of revolutionary. I mean, you talk about it in your piece, Hadass, and Pascal talks about this all the time, about how the weathermen just kind of looked at Black people in general as the vanguard of the revolution. Like just their Blackness alone makes them revolutionary. And again, kind of back to that movie, show me a middle-class art student that had certain privileges, and they really eat that shit up. They love it. They love it, love it, love it, love it, love it, love it, love it. Because there's no real revolution. There's no real fight back for them. When you're comfortable, what are you revolting against?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
And that's why the Adolf Reeds of the world are so important, because I remember, because I try to do a lot of work at trying to, I guess, accommodate the emotional needs of people while figuring out how to frame things, because that's just what good teachers do. Good teachers don't come out and say, you're never going to get good at learning, and here's why now, and use it as a motivator to then try to get them to learn, because that's basically what the White Fragility book sort of reads as, from my perspective. But sometimes you got to have some people also who are saying the blunt truth with so much clarity, with analogies to point out just how absurd the reasoning is. And that point, two things that always stuck with me with Adolf Reed, because I wanted to be the Bonilla Silva style colorblind racism scholar and anti-bias trainer, the traditional one. But the two things that messed me up, and I almost had an identity crisis. One of them was shout out to Zine Magudani. Because I was in her office all the time. I was like, Zine, I don't get it.
Shout out to Zine.
And she was like, you still believe in Santa Claus? She didn't say it. She said it much harsher, but that was but two things that he said that just flipped the script for me. One was that if we get to or that if we accept your reasoning, then 1% of the population can have 99% of the stuff that matters, as long as 50% of that 1% are women, 13% are Black, 15% are Hispanic, and whatever the appropriate proportions for LGBTQ folks. That rocked my brain for a while, because I was like, well, there's no that logic is tight and it's sound. And then Zena and I were joking about how, well, if what a lot of people talk about is true, then progress would look like having we could still have slavery as long as 50% of the slave owners are women, 15% or 7% are Black women, and so we need more Black women business owners. Ends up sort of sounding a lot like we need more Black slave owners, but Black women slave owners or plantation owners. And the second rash thing that I go to a lot, just at the beginning, is who benefits, cui bono. And starting with that, I usually find that with the folks who believe that the art projects for as substitutes for good learning, that when I ask who benefits, and then just keep pressing that, usually what it boils down to in that conversation is that the people who primarily benefit are educators who don't teach students who struggle to learn, and this ends up being a substitute for doing your job well, and that's where I have to come in to say that actually the core need that's being addressed is you are experiencing cognitive dissonance because you want to be a good teacher, and disproportionately our students of color are not learning in your classroom. And rather than doing the much more difficult work of figuring out what does good teaching look like, and because you've also been surrounded by folks who say that Black students essentially can't learn unless they have Black teachers, which some people do say, that way to resolve that dissonance is to basically give some projects that deal with the emotional need of feeling like I'm accomplishing something without addressing the practical need of learning.
But can't we get a white teacher that likes hip hop? Like, isn't that? I mean, look, if we, or what if the Black teacher is like, you know, Bill Cosby, and makes the kids pull up their pants? Then do we look at that teacher like, ooh, that's a good teacher? Like Joe, to me, the best example of the whole like we need Black teachers is Joe Clark, right? There's a movie that came out in 1989 called Lean on Me, a true story about an actual man, a very conservative Black man whose idea about a good school was we'll just eliminate the riffraff. And the movie starts with this super fictional world of a school. Like, I've been to bad schools. I went to a decent high school, but in all of the schools that were around me, because I'm also 47, so I grew up in a time where schools really were before the metal detectors. I never saw a school this bad, like the one they show it in East Side High, where the girl she just gets sexually assaulted in front of a teacher, and these guys just rip her shirt off, and then it's like, oh, it's just another day at school. And the solution to this school that actually did have a lot of problems with violence was expel all the bad students first and foremost, and then lock the kids in the building. Yeah. If he locked from within, then the bad people couldn't get in, and it was a fire hazard. And the movie is literally about him like, no, the fire hazard isn't the hazard. It's these Black people are the hazard. And I'm saving the good ones from the bad ones. And that actually does come out of higher ed. That mentality hasn't really left. That to me feels like AAVE. Now in AAVE, we've just found a way to monetize those bad students. Now we can get professionals in that know how to speak nigganese. And as long as you can speak this language, right? Because it's just so far off that when the kids go to the classroom, it's like some Tarzan shit going on. And we need Jane Goodall to come in and speak the Tarzan language to these wild savages. And look at Pascal's like, God damn it, now all my friends in higher ed. That to me is where a lot of this shit goes. And to the main, it's in the abstract of Hadass's piece. It's in everything Cedrick has said. He studied under Zine. It just reinforces racism.
And underclass ideology.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, they love that. They love that. They get massively erect for underclass ideology to this day. Because it's monetizable now. Now you can get these experts to come in. It's the most neoliberal thing to talk about, right? Like, you can get an expert in because we all got a list of the experts. So and so's got a degree in nigganese. Therefore, you don't know how to communicate. We did it. We laughed about it. Pascal, remember we had the white guy on there talking about how Black people talk? He don't be at work, but he be at work. Like, I don't know anybody that talks like Morello. I don't know any Black people that speak like leprechauns. I've yet to meet them. I haven't been to that part of, I guess it's the south side of North Ireland. I haven't been there. But I don't know. Sorry.
How did we get here?
Dude, because nothing pisses me off more than like, oh, Black people need special special interpreters. I actually hire me because I can get in touch with the black students. I may not come from their area, but I had some cousins that had some disciplinary problems. Ergo, I understand the plight. Look at these dreadlocks.
Yeah, that's why I think
I have
Zine was the one who told me that, like, she at some point she was like, well, some of the work that you're talking about, that a lot of people actually do sell themselves as doing, which is totally messed up. And it was really popular during like the 80s, 90s with
the 90s.
the sort of like, and 2000s a little bit, the sort of cultural competence presume that like you can be competent in a culture which is the same as ethnicity, which is the same as race, and it just leads to racist implications. And Zine was, I think, the one who told me that the precursors for a lot of these types of roles are colonial functionaries. So yeah, makes sense.
Yep.
Damn. Dropping that phenon on them. That's a proper use of phenon. Pascal, do they speak AAVE in your household?
No.
So look on it.
Oh.
So Pascal, do you be at work? Or you not be at work?
I'd be wondering why we're talking like this in the first place.
I really feel like this is where this discourse gets you. It gets you to this place of like siloing off your racial group and saying that we need to have, the test scores aren't there, the grades aren't there, we're expelling them at a high rate. It must be because we can't talk to them.
Well,
they're savages. So let's,
Yeah, that's totally it. I mean, when all like the third white privilege that I talk about is like this that, white is the normalization. And then you ask people to say, okay, what's the white norm that you're talking about? When you say white norms, what do you mean? And there's like so little that they say about this except unaccented English that gets mentioned, like expecting, and it just is like, expecting people to read, expecting people to have unaccented English. It's just all of what you're saying. Like, okay, it's racist. It's racist when you like cut down to what's being said. It's just tropes.
And why cede that ground too? Like you said, I was like, because now, like, if I accept those arguments, then if I am an employer in this country, then I'm like, well, part of their culture is not showing up on time. So
yes.
Right?
Yeah, but that is part of what they're saying.
Again, it just all this shit just
right? Like it's and it's so, and then the stuff before about like the sort of like the cultural expert stuff, like that's also like just such an obvious what do you call it, reflection of how bureaucracies work. Like that's like Taylorism of humanity to a T. Like it's a fiction, but it's a fiction that reflects the ideal of a bureaucracy, which is you could take the human population divide them into subgroups and like master the ability to properly understand and manage those subgroups, which is part of like I think why also some of this takes on too, because like it's like again the colonial functionary stuff. Like I remember when she first told me, first I had to look up what that meant, and then I was like, oh, then I got terrified. I was like, wait, this totally makes sense. And then when I come and hear that a lot of the cultural competence stuff is still popular, even though it's so blatantly now it seems just so blatantly racist, then one like part of what I just keep seeing work is just pointing out the absurdity of that line of reasoning. So bring it to its logical conclusion. So what you're saying then is that there are teachers, including black, like you're saying there are black teachers who are competent or who have a mastery of all the logic, scripts, habits, cultural ways of being of all Black people. Who's that person? And Black people, including folks who were born and raised in the United States, folks who are immigrants, folks who are descendants of slavery, folks like who is this person? And then you're also saying that you have that mastery over all white students, and that's why we're doing that explains the disparity. Like, you just bring it to the logical conclusion and show up the absurdity, and then follow that with, could the problem actually be that most people don't know how to teach well? Like, if I am a doctor and I am somebody who's supposed to, or a physical therapist, and I am a physical therapist and I use the skills that I learned from my physical therapist in the past, but I don't take any time to just understand how the body works, then perhaps that might explain why I'm not a good physical therapist to people who wouldn't have benefited just from the previous styles of therapy that my physical therapist had. Like, maybe you're actually only good with a very particular type of student, mostly because you actually don't know much about how the brain works. You actually don't know much about how people learn. And the more you understand how people learn, perhaps maybe you could be a better teacher.
Toussaint, did you want to read that comment on the screen?
Tanya Marshall says, I'm a middle-aged Black woman with short afro hair who had a white woman touch my hair. I didn't say anything to her, but I knew she wasn't supposed to touch a Black woman's hair.
All I see when I read that was Florida Evans. Damn, damn, damn.
Oh, your brain is a special thing.
Tanya Marshall, you have the patience of a saint. Because I don't give a fuck who would have touched my hair. I would have slapped the fire out of their ass.
But stuff like that happens. And like Tanya, part of why I'm not in HR and don't want to be in HR, with my role, I'm in the sort of student instruction side, is that with stuff like that, like, those things happen, and the part that's important is that usually the person who complains, even about the most obvious messed up things, especially if it's somebody who's higher up the organizational hierarchy, usually the person who complains about the problem ends up becoming the problem, and for the institution. And so the part of what I tell people about what this work should look like in the HR side, man, structure beard, is is mostly like harm reduction of like, can we let's just acknowledge the fact that part of why it's hard to work in this place is because when these things happen, and they do, the person who complains about even the most obvious messed up things ends up being coded as the threat or the problem to the institution. And the ideal state is for somebody just to suck it up or to handle it on their own. And then to pose the question, so what are the alternatives? But that's why I'm not in the HR side, because I don't know what a lot of these alternatives look like. Because the threat detection and the risk management piece of it is just such a core function of how organizations work, or else we wouldn't have saw all the hot messes we saw with the Catholic Church.
Yeah, a lot of this is about not getting sued. That's, I think, what you're saying in part. It's just a lot of what's going on is about not getting sued.
Yeah.
Like, there's that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I just want
You could do a show like this, and you could sue us. It's like blood from a turnip. Go for it.
I want to say something Paul said I saw is Paul Prescott is just like, also with the, when you focus on the cultural competency stuff and you try to train people to teach, well, first of all, like you don't have good teachers, in part because you can't hire good teachers because you can't pay them enough, or you can't pay them enough to justify how much time. So there's like all of that austerity stuff happening too. And then also you're teaching cultural competency into a group of people who might not even be able to get a job, no matter how culturally competent their teacher was. Because so there's all of these stuff that, like, when people say, why can't, like, the pushback I get is never, luckily, it's not you're wrong, it's why can't you do both? I don't get why you can't say white privilege and why. That's always what it is. It's that, and the reason you can't do both is because it is a question of the resources that this demands are resources that go against focusing on where resources actually need to be placed, which is, you want to spend time on cultural competency? Okay, but they're not going to get jobs and your teachers aren't going to get paid. Like that's part of the circle that's happening here.
Yeah, there's so much overselling that happens by folks, in my opinion, in the sort of who love who want to frame themselves, like I know a lot of DEI folks frame themselves as like change agents or change makers, and I've I think taken solace in the fact that and just embraced that I stay away from all that mess, because that's overselling. At the end of the day, and the more that we oversell what can actually be accomplished, the more we end up getting more resentment in the long run towards the good, at least some of the good work we're trying to do. So that overselling ends up being a threat to like the existence of good stuff. So that's why you can't do both. You can't as well, because like once you start to oversell and like promote, it's almost like saying, why can't we do astrology and science?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know.
And you know what? If you figure it out, let me know.
Okay. I'm a Cancer, by the way.
I mean, you where can people find your work, Hadass?
I have to get that together. I have like no social media presence or anything, but the article I wrote is in American Political Thought, that journal. You can also, if you can find my email, you're welcome to find it and email me, and I'm happy to send it to you. And hopefully more work forthcoming once I get my teaching.
Well, would you mind if I put it up on the TIR?
No, I would not
Patreon?
mind.
Okay, there you go. If you guys want to read Hadass's stuff, it's on the TIR Patreon.
Thank you.
I'll put it up later, as long as my phone will let me have Wi-Fi.
Yeah, it's so well written. I highly recommend it.
Yeah, it really sucks.
Thank you, and thank you for.
Yes, very easy to read.
This has been fun to talk about and think about it more. So thank you, guys.
Pascal, do you have anything to say?
No, this is a very enjoyable conversation. I really enjoyed the fact that we were able to delve deeply and maintain a certain level of comedy, discourse as well around a subject matter that is really, really, really trepidatious and very annoying to me.
Did anyone try to touch your hair, Pascal?
That's since I had it. This was a long time ago.
Toussaint, no one tried to touch your hair?
No. When I found out that people were doing that, I was just like, oh, no one has ever tried.
You gotta kind of have. There's a lot of things have to be at play, right? You have to be in a place where white people have never seen a black person.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, ooh, chocolate. It's like they're all fucked up. And then maybe you have a really cool hairstyle.
Mm-hmm.
I'd be really mad if I just had a regular ass fucking natural and somebody tried to touch it. It's like, you know how long it took to get this shit just right, motherfucker? You got the audacity to touch it. Well, thank you, Cedrick. I would say, where can people find you? But remember, his life is a mystery because we want him to keep his job.
I'm not gonna lie. So at my first, right after I got board approved, and I was already on pins and needles, like, damn, because I was part of Class Unity. I was posting stuff for Marxist websites, and I was like, I'm gonna lose my job as soon as people start looking me up. And at the first board meeting after I got approved, somebody came up during like the open session and was like, the district actually hired a self-identified Marxist and all this stuff. And I remember thinking, not only gonna lose my job, but like, damn, all this stuff about Marxist DEI professionals, like they actually found like one. Oh no! So I'm like, am I doing? But because I've never heard of a Marxist HR manager, but it's kind of like astrology and science, right? And physics.
Science.
But but I will say as my last word that it's true. That's true.
Are you really from Bulgaria? Were you born in Bulgaria?
No, it was an NBA player who.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was about to say no way.
Yeah. Brother, I'm 5'6". I was not a professional basketball player. All right. But the last word I'll have real quick is that because I know I get this every time I come or every time I'm on a podcast, is that I do think that equity work can be beneficial if it's if it's focused on students and it's focused on reminding people that students have rights too. They have civil rights. Our students with disabilities have rights. Our students for every civil rights group have like civil rights that need to be respected. Sometimes people need to be told, hey, that's messed up and you shouldn't touch other people's hair. And I know we give a lot of credit to people, but I keep learning we should not give as much credit to human beings as we would like to think. Because I got stories. I got stories for days. But the three pieces of work that I do that I found to be beneficial for I think all of us. One is helping people see and understand how do our brains work and how you actually help people go from not understanding something to understanding something, because that's a lost art and there actually is a science to it and most people don't take the time to dive into that. So I make sure people get paid to dive into that. Secondly, making sure that when these things do happen, because people do overt things a lot, making sure that in the handling of these situations, of these crises, because some of them are full-blown crises, making sure that that we begin with the premise, not that this is so unbelievable that it could happen in this organization or in this county or whatever, but begin with the premise that it does happen and we should actually validate that it was messed up, and we usually don't do that. And the third thing is that we have kids who genuinely want to figure out how to make a positive impact in the lives of other people. And in school districts, usually we don't give space and time and resources for kids to figure out how to do that. And so for me, that's like what all my equity work is focused on. And if anybody in the audience wants to hear more or talk shop, I'm always happy to do so, while also acknowledging that a lot of DEI work is crap and harmful, and I reject it completely.
All right. Cedrick, Soul on Ice, Simmons. Now, we will be back next week. Or actually, I think Ben Burgess will be back here Sunday with Philosophy for the People. Hopefully, by the time we come back next week, I'll have internet. Thank you, Pascal. Thank you, Toussaint. Thank you, Hadass, and good Cedrick. Thank you, everybody, for watching. If you have something you'd like to add, you feel we didn't cover, or you disagree with anything we said, make sure you leave it in the comments. I will screenshot it and send it to everybody and say, can you believe what this motherfucker wrote? That's what I do.
It is true.
On that note, thank you, and we are
out.
Peace.